Stanley Harsden, agus fáilte uile, dus college alle school in Vanens is net zo nog, dus you know Peter Edge, was alle school Oxford Brookes. A very warm welcome to University College Isle of Man for this evening's lecture with Professor Peter Edge from Oxford Brookes University. I have no doubt that most of you sitting in the audience tonight are very familiar with Peter and his work. He has... Yes, you're here indeed. He has researched and published widely on small jurisdictions, legal and political and criminal issues. And this evening he's going to be talking to us about the role, the evolution of the role of the Chief Minister. So without further ado, please welcome Professor Peter Edge.
Thank you very much for being out on an incredibly dreary late December evening. I hope to take you away from all of this to the sun-kissed South Pacific island of Kiribati. And that's, frankly, a quite strange thing for me to know anything about. And the way I came to know about this is I did a number of papers on overviews of small democracies and how their legislatures work and how their executives work. And as part of this, I talked a bit about Kiribati, whose leader is the Baratentri. And I was asked a question by Daphne. That all sounds very interesting, but does it actually ever happen? And I didn't know the answer. And so myself, Jennifer Corrin of the University of Queensland, who is rapidly rediscovering the Manx roots and has taken research visits here fairly recently, and Professor Claire Catan, the Law Commissioner of Jersey, who has given these papers with me in the past. We all got together and we actually tried to answer some of the questions that came from that we don't know. Okay? So what we found, I hope, was interesting. So there will be a little bit more non-Manx material in my discussion tonight, as opposed to previous papers, but it will be going back into, feeding into discussions about the Manx situation. So my thoughts on the position of the Chief Minister are not about this particular Chief Minister, it's about the whole office. I'm going to briefly start by sketching out the difference between the presidential and the Westminster model, because it's something that we talk about quite often, and I just want to sort of really lock in the fundamental ideas there. And in particular, raise the idea that in a way it's quite odd that the Isle of Man didn't go down the presidential route back in 1944. I'm going to talk about the Office of Chief Minister, the route we actually went. Try to bring together my shattered thinking since last Thursday night about Boris in the United Kingdom, so Boris as Prime Minister, and the Baratentri, which will be the bulk of my paper, which will introduce you to the wonderful small democracy of Kiribati and explain the way that they have come up with a unique way of balancing some of the pressures around democracy and legitimacy in a small democracy. And then finish by turning it over to you guys to try and get a sense of where next in relation to the head of government of the Isle of Man. So, separation of powers is pretty much an accepted value that every democratic state should have, where you divide powers into judicial function, exercised by the judiciary, so deciding guilt and innocence, running the courts, the legislative function, the creation of new laws, which is done by the legislature, and executive function, which is pretty much everything else. When you think of government, that is where the executive function is, done by the executive. And I'm going to be focusing on the legislative-executive relationship today. There are things to be said about the judicial role, but I'm not going to cover them today. And there are a number of different ways of exploring these issues. Across democracies around the world, there's two models which are very common. You'll find in multiple countries, and they're well discussed. The first, which is the presidential model. Up until President Trump, we really had the West Wing to thank for knowing anything about the presidential model, but Donald has helped give us, almost a very close awareness of things like impeachment and all that sort of stuff. So I'll scamper through that. The thing about the presidential model is that the legislature and the judiciary, the legislature and the executive, are really quite distinct. So in the American model, you have a president who is the head of the federal government, and you have Congress, which is the federal legislature. Most systems have some overlap. There is overlap even in the American system, which portrays itself as very purist. in that the Vice President, who's part of the Executive, presides over the Senate, which is part of the Congress. And there's various other examples I could give. Membership is very distinct. In the presidential system, you have a president who is not part of the legislature, and they then appoint their cabinet, their ministers, who are also not part of the legislature. So you have quite the separate organs of government in a very clear-cut way. And crucially, each of them has freestanding authority within a broad constitutional order. You don't have, the President of the US is not responsible to Congress for their authority and their mandate and their power. They are responsible to the electorate who elected them. So I'm going to just very briefly, using the American model as the presidential system par excellence, give you an illustration of how the presidential system works. The President is elected by an electoral college. This can be mind-numbingly complicated and boring. If you already know the answer to this, I won't tell you, you don't need to be told. If you don't know the answer, you don't need to know. Okay? But that is why you can have a situation where one candidate gets most of the votes, but does not get most of the electoral college votes, and so does not become the president. Okay? Similar to the UK system, where actually our MPs sit as an electoral college to avoid the Prime Minister, effectively. So you can have a party which has a serious minority, let us say for hypothetical purposes 46%, of the votes cast, but has a big majority of seats, and they don't have the Prime Minister. The US Constitution has quite complicated rules about how you work out how many electoral college seats each state have, and then the states get to decide how those are actually allocated. The vast majority of US states go for winner takes all, so if a Democrat gets 51% of the votes cast in Wisconsin, they will get all the electoral college votes cast in Wisconsin, but you don't have to go that way. And Alaska, for instance, actually has special rules about, they have 3 seats, and they give 1 seat to the runner-up and 2 to the first, so it's a state rights issue. So that's how they get elected, they get appointed. Now, because they are not appointed by Congress, because they have a freestanding political and legal authority, they aren't removed from Congress simply because they no longer command support of Congress. Which is why you have the classic American situation of a president of one party in constant battle with a Congress dominated by another party. Okay? Because they have different mandates. Instead, if you want to get rid of them, and I put this forward really as hypothetical things you might want to follow over the next 3 to 6 months. Article 1 and 2 of the US Constitution, the House of Representatives can impeach for treason, bribery, high crimes and misdemeanours. The Senate then hears the case, and a 2/3 majority of the Senate have to vote to impeach. If they are impeached, they immediately lose office, and they are disqualified from holding any office in future. So it's quite a nuclear option. They don't go to jail. It's not a criminal trial, it's the mechanism by which you remove a president who has committed high crimes and misdemeanours. So that's the presidential system. The Westminster model is the one that we're probably more familiar with. The executive and legislature are not fully distinct, and I'm probably being a bit generous here. They are very closely entangled. The legislature derives authority from the support of the executive. Sorry, typo on there. And the head of government typically is a member of the legislature who commands the support of the majority of the legislature. Where you have a legislature which contains a democratic element and a non-democratic element, an element that is not directly elected, quite often you are only responsible to the democratically elected part of it. So, for instance, in the UK, the Prime Minister needs to command the support of the majority of the House of Commons, does not need to command any support in the House of Lords, because they don't have a democratic mandate, it's not seen as being politically significant. And the senior members of government, by which I mean the ministers and cabinet ministers, are themselves members of the legislature. So unlike the American presidential system, where you have this strict separation, different authority, different responsibilities, different mandates, you actually have a lot of blurring here into the power of the legislature. Typically the leader of the largest party becomes Prime Minister, and they hold as long as they have the confidence of the House of the legislature. Classically, the PM got to decide when the game was up and would get to call an election if necessary. They could also simply lose a vote of confidence, and an election would pretty much follow automatically. And you do find a number of instances in the UK and in Canada and Australia where a PM who has a majority is thinking, actually, this isn't a big enough majority. I'm going to lose at some point. I'm better off calling an election now in the hope of getting a bigger majority and consolidating my position. For instance, Theresa May had a majority of 12. She knew that a good, strong election would get her a stonking majority, and she went for it. And we all know how that ended. Now, the original Westminster model, the UK model, has very substantial unwritten elements. And you would be surprised at how broad these are. If you search through written law about the Prime Minister, there is remarkably little. In particular, there's very little statute law dealing with the office of Prime Minister. So we had, for instance, in the run-up to Thursday, people arguing what would happen if the Conservatives got a majority, but Boris Johnson lost his seat as a minister. Would he be able to be Prime Minister if he suddenly came back into the House of Lords? Would he be able to be Prime Minister if another loyal Conservative MP resigned and there was a by-election? Could he be Prime Minister waiting for the by-election? Okay? This is not laid out in statute anywhere. This is all very, very nebulous. And also, who can be a minister? Until quite recently, i.e. Friday morning, I would have said that if you had been in the Cabinet as an MP, and you lost an election as an MP, or you chose not to stand because you thought things were so grim, you would not then retain your Cabinet position. In fact, we now know that that is something that can happen under the UK Constitution. Now, the Westminster model constitutions, so the constitutions that have been picked up elsewhere around the former British Empire, but not in the UK, are much better documented. Because they were created by statute, typically. So most Westminster model constitutions are much better written down than the UK example. Now, I've suggested that the Westminster model spread throughout the British Empire, and it did, but it went hand in hand with the idea of responsible government. And responsible government was, okay, you people in Newfoundland or in Queensland are sufficiently robust as a political society that you can be given more control over your own activities. So the executive stops being responsible to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and becomes responsible to the local legislature, the people who've been elected. So when we talk about responsible government, that's what we mean in the Westminster model. Government responsible to the democratically elected representatives. The Isle of Man acquired an elected legislature in 1866, as it changed the way in which it elected the House of Keys, but responsible government was rejected. It was thought that the Isle of Man was too small and too primitive and not really ready for that degree of autonomy and control over its own activities. So incredibly late in the imperial scheme of things, the Lieutenant Governor remained the head of government. And this wasn't like a formal thing, this was the person who actually made the crucial decisions. So throughout the 19th century, you find the LG is a huge political figure in man's political affairs. They were the head of government and they were assisted by officers of the council who were, in some ways, their servants. Now, post-World War II, it was recognised that even for the Isle of Man, this was not sustainable, and there needed to be a shift away from government by an official appointed by the Home Office to something different. Bear in mind, 1944, you had Tynwald and the LG, and the LG was doing an awful lot of the heavy lifting of the executive, and Tynwald, although he was starting to get involved in executive issues, was predominantly the legislature. The route taken could have been to keep that model and to turn the LG into a democratically elected presidential style figure. So go the presidential path. There was no way in 1944 or 1946 anyone was going to look outside the Westminster bubble for a way to develop. And so it was taken for granted that increased autonomy and increased responsibility meant the Westminster model. Okay? And that's why I call this slide the road not taken. So it was assumed that greater democracy would be achieved through the Westminster model as applied in a variant form to Tynwald. It took quite a long time, and really the modern Chief Minister, you see it begin to emerge in the mid-70s, I think. Starts to coalesce in the 80s and really comes in its modern form in the 90s. Chief Minister is appointed from Tynwald, who then appoints ministers. Before 2018, appointment by Tynwald as a whole, which was why we had the slightly unusual position whenever I try to explain this to English constitutional lawyers. Yes, the Lord Bishop gets to decide who's the head of government in the Isle of Man. This was changed, and now future appointments will be by and of MHKs only. The Chief Minister, when they're appointed, remains in Tynwald and actually remains in MHK with a constituency. So this implication, this entanglement of legislature and executive remains under the new model.
When was the Chief Minister first appointed?
68 was the bill, I think, wasn't it?
The title 1990, but in fact the
Council of Ministers bill.
the head of the boards of Tynwald had already begun to move into that space in the 80s, really. Much before 86, it's not really there yet. So I would say in the 80s and early 90s it started to materialise. So it's more recent actually than many people think as a mass constitutional innovation. And because we have a system which does not have parties, which I'll come back to a little later, the appointment of the Chief Minister takes place a month after the election of MHKs, within a month of the election of MHKs. So you vote for your MHK, and then they decide who has the support of the Chief Minister. And from the next election on, that will be the support of the majority of the MHKs, not the majority of Tynwald. So it used to be the MLCs would have a role, and they won't have in the next election. Before 2018, the Chief Minister could be removed by the majority of Tynwald. Now, the Legislative Council does not have a role in the appointment or removal of the Chief Minister, but the Chief Minister is protected by a special majority. So to get rid of the entire Council of Ministers and the Chief Minister at the same time, you need a special majority of 16 MHKs. That is unusually strong protection. The only parallel I found is the Cayman Islands, where 2/3 of their democratically elected House are required to vote to remove their equivalent of Chief Minister. This is exacerbated by the fact that in the Cayman Islands, 9 out of 24 representatives are part of government, and in the Isle of Man it's very considerably higher than that.
Was a special majority 17 at first? Is it now to 16, or was it? As of last year, I thought it was 17 MHKs made a special majority.
Yeah.
17's theoretical.
Okay.
But I don't know if it's
Specific to this, yeah.
Yeah, the bill. Well, the allegedly up-to-date Act of Tynwald on the Tynwald site says 16, so I did double check it because I had 17 in my head as well.
Got it.
So I don't know if 17 was there briefly and went,
Okay.
but it's a big majority.
Got
It's a
it.
special majority. So let's step away from the Isle of Man for a little while and have a look at some insights from the United Kingdom. Boris Johnson, the continuing Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. I think I will just move on from that slide. Okay, so the classic UK model is we've got a two-party and a few-party system. One of these parties has a majority. The leader of that party will become the Prime Minister, and they will use their majority to carry out their governmental agenda. If you want to get rid of a sitting Prime Minister, you need a vote of no confidence, which is a simple majority. So not like the rank system, it's a simple majority of MPs. The Fixed Term Parliament Act 2011 took away the unilateral power of the PM to call an election whenever the time was good. And that is why we saw the unedifying mess around Brexit, really. So you had a situation where there was a clear majority, the party discipline broke down because the parties were internally so divided over this crucial issue. And we had a crisis where there wasn't really anyone in a position to make a definitive strike. And interestingly, at the time you decided that the UK Constitution is unusually unwritten, you had a situation where the Supreme Court had to make a number of controversial constitutional rulings. Initially into the role of Parliament in the Brexit process, in Miller, and then later into the lawfulness of prorogation towards the end of last year. So those were really significant times that the Supreme Court has had to move into the constitutional space. because the UK Constitution isn't really very well implemented in law. Thursday marked a return to what passes for normality in UK constitutional affairs. The PM has a sizable majority, and we're likely to see these sort of unusual constitutional crises probably simmer down as the PM implements their policies with a big majority. One likelihood is that the Fixed Term Parliament Act, which stopped Boris Johnson calling an election whenever he wanted, is going to be repealed. I suspect that's going to be one of the things that will happen. I'm going to draw some lessons from the UK experience towards the end. Let me move to something less well known, which is Kiribati. This is the current penitentiary of Kiribati. Let me tell you a bit about the country and a bit about the system. So, sovereign state, so not a dependency, that's an important difference between other man. Oops. Gosh. Right. Interestingly, it's a small islands state. So you have... Oh, lordy. Right. This may be... Okay. Right. Okay, I have a workaround for this, but it will look a little bit messy, so apologies. Right. Sorry, you're going to see all the working now, but at least we won't run away from us, I hope. Okay, so a sovereign island state. It isn't a single island, it's actually 33 islands scattered over a very considerable amount of the Pacific. So it actually has 3 million kilometres, including its territorial waters. Population, 72,000. Formerly a British possession. Unlike large chunks of the colonial empire, self-government was not something that happened to the Kiribati people. So you find different bits of the British Empire really from about the 1890s, with increasing pace from the 1930s, begin to get self-government. 1967 is the first time you find any political life at the national level for the Kiribati. Up until then, they were completely ruled by people sent from Whitehall. So you had 1967, someone else's direct election, 1974 ministerial system, 1979 independence. That is 0 to 60. Yeah? You've gone from no political life, no political autonomy at all as a nation, to completely independent in a very short period of time. Now, they had the great good fortune to have an absolutely excellent last governor, Governor Smith. Governor Smith was offered the equivalent of a pre-packed constitution. There were people from the Foreign Commonwealth Office going around the remnants of the British Empire giving out constitutions. You know, here's one. It'll work fine. It'll look lovely up against the corner, that sort of thing, okay? Governor Smith said, I'm not sure that works for us. We have no experience of national government to work from already. We have certain religious divides between Catholics and Protestants we have to manage quite carefully. So he departed from the Westminster model, which was being offered, and there was an attempt made to undermine him by local civil servants who wrote to London saying, this is ridiculous, this isn't the Westminster model, this is something quite different. He called a constitutional convention, which had about 200 baronetary people, plus a small number of expat advisors, including an Australian law professor. So if anyone were to say statutes being a bit odd and abstract, you can probably blame the Australian law professor for his role in that. And the Constitutional Convention was largely endorsed by the referendum and then by elections, and really gave us a distinctive structure of the baronetary. It was the head of government. Their version of our chief minister. So, how do you get to be baronetary? Initially, there are appointments to the House of Assembly, which is the equivalent of the keys, then a national election to Berwick-Entry. And the way that works is that within a month, a bit like our first nominate Chief Minister, the House of Assembly gets together and it nominates 3 to 4 candidates, and the national electorate in a single poll then pick one of those 3 to 4 candidates to become their Berwick-Entry. This then creates a vacancy, because unlike our system, the Berwick-Entry is not part of the legislature. They leave the legislature, and a by-election is triggered, and you replace their seat with a new election. Now, 3 to 4 sounds an odd number, and I'm not being casual. The Kiribati Constitution requires 3 to 4 candidates to be put forward. The reason for that is that there were very strong tensions between Catholic and Protestant communities in pre-independence Kiribati, and the governor was very concerned that if there were 2 candidates, you would have a Protestant candidate and a Catholic candidate every time, and that would be an exacerbation of intercommunal tensions. And he also was a bit frightened that if you had sort of like a 75 long list, you would get some very weird things coming out of that. So 3 to 4 are nominated by the National Assembly, and then there's a national vote. Now, there have been 11 Berwick-Entry elections since independence. 6 of the 11, the third candidate has got more votes than the difference between the first and second candidate. So having 3 candidates rather than 2, if all of the third candidate had gone to the second candidate, that person would have been elected. So it looks like actually having multiple candidates can be quite significant. However, Vantries in 1993 and then Bryony in 2002 actually did some field work on what happened when you had the House of Assembly nominating the Berwick-Entry, and they came to the conclusion it was a stitch-up. You would have fairly quickly 2 groups coalesce. We want Bill to be Berwick-Entry, we don't want Bill. And the don't want Bill would fasten on somebody that they would rather have than Bill. Okay? So you would have these 2 parties is the wrong word, but you would have these 2 groups who would coalesce around the issue of who the Berwick-Entry should be after the actual election, and any new members of the House of Assembly, they were absolute gold. You would find people going out of their way to make them friends and make them comfortable in their new roles. So, wait, you really should come over to this side. You know, Bill's a lovely chap, you just want to work with him. And what they actually do is, I think maybe they play a lot of bridge in Kiribati, because they would create a dummy. Got to have 3 candidates. We'll have Bill, not Bill, and Bill's mate. And Bill's mate, as soon as he's on the ballot paper, goes home to his island and keeps his head down, and doesn't do any interviews, and doesn't do any media stuff. And if anyone asks, it actually you should go with Bill. Okay? So the Assembly actually subvert this idea that you have to have 3 candidates by making sure that there's only 2 realistic candidates. Which is interesting. You then have a national election, there's then a by-election. So when the system works normally and stably, you will have 3 elections in the space of about 2 months. You'll have the national election to the House of Assembly, a month later you'll have the national election to the Berwick-Entry, and then in one constituency you will have the election for the replacement of the Berwick-Entry. I can see from the looks of despair creeping over your faces that the thought of 3 elections so close together is a powerful argument against this model. How do you get rid of them? Oh, sorry. The last pre-independence Chief Minister and the first Berwick-Entry who held the office for 3 terms, illegally, I have to say, but we won't go into too much detail on that. There is a 2-term limit in the Kiribati Constitution. It explicitly dealt with the first Chief Minister being grandfathered into the Independence Constitution. He ignored it. He seems to have got away with it. He said, "This is far more acceptable to the Kiribati way of thinking than a straight Westminster parliamentary system in which the Prime Minister is simply the leader of the strongest party or coalition. This constitutional procedure helps make for stability in the overall system of government. Because the people are involved and participate directly in the election of the President, they are more likely to be supportive of the policies of the government." So Tabai, who was writing towards the end of his final period, thought that actually this system was very good for stability and for national buy-in into national policies, because there had been a national poll. Getting rid of them is really, really weird. And this is what triggered the... Sorry.
Sorry, just going back to that previous point about the buy-in, do we know what percentage turnouts there are for the 3 elections?
Very good, typically. The presidential polls tend to be better than the national constituency polls. So people who couldn't be bothered turning out for their local MP would turn out for the presidential election. And sometimes the majorities are quite substantial. So the biggest was 67% in the national poll, which was a really stonking mandate. Now this creates a problem, I think. You've got a group of democratically elected members of the legislature who have a mandate. You have a directly elected Barotenchai who has a mandate. What happens if the two fall out? Under the Kiribati Constitution, the democratically elected legislature can eject the Barotenchai from their office with a bare majority. It is easier to remove the nationally elected Barotenchai than it is the indirectly elected Chief Minister in the Isle of Man. Much easier. Okay? Now, I thought this was quite odd. What makes it even odder is that when the House of Assembly pressed the button to get rid of the Barotenchai, they also all get themselves out of a job, because the entire process triggers. So the members of the Assembly say, "You're out, mate." They are automatically ejected from their office. A special 3-person skeleton government keeps things ticking over, and we do the whole process again. Okay? So the legislature are completely re-elected, and then you go through the Barotenchai process again.
Wouldn't this happen to be the fact that it's a republic and it's a sovereign state? So since 1979, since it became independent, so this ejecting policy is much more likely to occur because it is sovereign than it being a crown dependency.
Well, I'm not sure, because presidential impeachment, for instance, it happens in a sovereign system. This is incredibly easier. It's much easier to get rid of a Barotenchai than an existing US president.
Oh, true, absolutely, yeah.
And there are some examples in larger states of a head of state and a directly elected prime minister. So Israel between 1992 and 2010, I think my memory is
Is that because it's like the equalizer button as well? Because it's not like Congress has to then all dismiss at the same time as the president if he were removed from office. But this, in the sense of republic, is like that big ejection button.
Now, I was talking about this with some colleagues, and one of the things I like about this is that for the vote of no confidence passed, you are saying to the people who elected the Barotenchai, you guys got it wrong, I'm sorry, we're going to throw them out. And by doing so, because everyone faces a new election, you then have to face your own electors. Yeah? You know, we said you were wrong in electing this guy. You must see what we were getting at. You know, this is why we did this. And I think it's quite interesting. Sorry.
Yeah, and say 33 islands. How many candidates are there?
Between 3 and 4. There is one island which is about half the population, but they're not always from there. They often have power bases elsewhere. Now, very distinctive. My first thought was, that's a really interesting mechanism to deal with this clashing mandates. My second thought was, I bet they never actually do it. I mean, can you imagine putting yourself out of a job, all your colleagues out of a job, throwing out the president who you think has just been has recently appointed? So, anyone like to guess if this has ever been used?
It has been used.
It has.
I know.
Yeah. It is the standard. This is the normal way you get to cease to be Barotenchai. There have been 5 Barotenchai so far, and the first 3 of them all lost office through a vote of no confidence. Okay? Whoa. They can then come back and serve, and one of them actually did get back in.
But then he
He could be kicked out again.
so you might not last a week.
You might have 2 very short terms. Yeah. So 3 successful VNCs have been brought. They are a fantastic mix. We have people being thrown out just before their term expires, which I presume is an attempt to make sure they don't go for another election. You also have people being thrown out within a month of winning an election. So somebody could win a national poll, and a month later the legislature go, out you go, mate. Okay? So this is not a theoretical construct. This is part and parcel of the way the Kiribati do their politics. You may sometimes read Max Anton, I think it's a bit brutal, but Kiribati Ajabitan. We're currently facing another vote of no confidence. I'll be very quick on this. It's not at all well documented yet, because it's literally happening as we speak. The current Beretenchai decided that geopolitically it would be better for Kiribati to align to the People's Republic of China than to Taiwan, which has been its ally for the last 30 or 40 years. There were serious concerns about this amongst the members of the legislature, suggesting that it be bought, basically, and that it wasn't in the national interest. They put to the Speaker that there should be a motion debated of a vote of no confidence. The Speaker said, I have the absolute discretion to decline any motion, so we will not vote on this motion. Would it surprise you to learn that the Speaker was best buddies with the current Beretenchai? This went to the High Court of Kiribati, who, fair credit to them, said, no, you don't get to choose this motion. If it is put to you, you must put it to the legislature, because otherwise this mechanism has no teeth. Whereupon the Speaker prorogued the Assembly and fled the country, hoping that once he was out of the jurisdiction, nobody else could trigger the vote of no confidence. It went back to the High Court. The High Court has just decided that that is absolutely crazy, and that if the Speaker's not going to do it, they will make sure that somebody else calls it. So there's got to be another vote of no confidence. And as you can imagine, anyone who was in the undecided camp before this has thought, we are not voting confidence for this chap. So there's another one. By this time next month, I'll probably be able to say that there's been 5 Beretenchai, 4 lost office. The vote of no confidence. So it's clearly massively important constitutional mechanism, but its influence is subtler than that. Remember, when you hit that big red button to get rid of the Beretenchai, you are dissolving your legislative assembly, you're putting yourself out of a job, you are throwing yourself open to the electoral process. Tito, who spent 3 terms as effectively the leading opposition politician, and then 2 terms as Beretenchai himself, said that the power of the vote of no confidence could be used by the government. So the example he gave is that every time Parliament threatened to establish an anti-corruption committee, the President said he would make it a matter of confidence. So people who voted against him in order to set up this committee would be kicking themselves out of the job. And Tito, who spent about 7 years trying to get this committee going, basically said people who would have wanted the commission backed off rather than lose their job. Because their vote of no confidence would not only get rid of the Beretenchai, it would get rid of them as well. Now, there is nothing quite like the Beretenchai model. It's a fascinating, it's really interesting hybrid of presidential and Westminster model type norms. So what I'm going to do in the final section is move to this idea of where next. We have the Chief Minister system in the Isle of Man. There are these things we could look at. I would quote the famous Billy Bragg on this: you can borrow ideas, you can't borrow situations. You nearly got some version of that, so count blessings. So these are interesting perspectives we can apply from that situation. The obvious route is incremental change. Now, the Chief Minister was a constitutional novelty. It's not sort of one of the ancient parts of the Manx Constitution. It's based on a foreign model. It's based on a Westminster model adopted very late in really the 70s and 80s. But it's comparatively low cost. You don't have to have 3 elections every time you have a general election. You don't have to have an entire separate branch of government set up to run an executive. And there is indirect democratic accountability. So, you vote for your MHK votes for the Chief Minister. If you don't like the way they voted, next time they stand up, they have to defend their choice of Chief Minister. You know, why did you support this person? What were you thinking of? And it is clearly capable of incremental refinement. The next Chief Minister, for instance, will be the first to be appointed by the King. So that's one possibility, incremental change. Another one is to go more Westminster and move towards a more explicit Prime Minister-style system. The trouble is, this is predicated on political parties. You know, in the UK, when you vote for your local MP, the vast majority of people vote for the person in the party ticket that has the Prime Minister that they want to have in charge of the country. Okay? So actually, a lot of the reason you vote for an MP is their role in the electoral college process of the PM, not because they think that he is a PM. So the only way it could move more close towards the UK model would be a growth of the party system in the Isle of Man. Now, let me do a completely unscientific straw poll. How many of you vote on party lines when voting for an MHK? One. How many of you vote on who you think would be the best MHK in your constituency? Okay. So I think we're some way away from a party system being embedded in the Manx constitutions. I think that would be a significant problem.
There's not many MHKs that put themselves up are actually aligned to a political party, so it's not a...
They haven't been.
They haven't been.
Well,
But
you don't go on
you
what's Pascal.
Yeah, you have had MHKs who have been aligned with the political party who, on the doorstep, have decided that's going to crash and burn and have bailed out literally on election day in past occasion. I would be interested to see the growth of a party political system. We have been anticipating since 1917. The McConnell Commission, when it came up with a way of reforming the Legislative Council, said we would consider direct election of the Legislative Council if there was party politics in the Isle of Man, which no doubt in due course there will be. And I know there have been glimmers, and I know that there are elements, and there may still be significant change ahead, but it's an awful long way to go from the current position to something which is a Westminster-style system. And just to give you a bit of context on this, I've said that other countries have a much more documented Westminster-style system. Some of them actually have the statutory office of Leader of the Opposition, with particular powers and particular responsibilities. So they hardwire in the idea of party politics in a way which even the Westminster model hasn't yet in a legal context.
Could the number of people in government be limited in the House of Keys? I think it should be maximum 11.
Well,
Does that happen anywhere? And then we could have a leader of the opposition as well, and particularly the rest.
yes, you could have a leader of the opposition without having party politics necessarily. You know, a month after you have a chief minister, and then the people who didn't vote for the chief minister could identify who their leader would be.
Limited by somehow. That's only what we've got at the moment, 99% of the party.
This time last year I talked about the issue about the number of members of the legislature who are in the executive, if you count departmental members. And I think that is a very fair criticism, and we are very unusual, the number that we have.
Thanks, Reg. When I listened to, I was just looking at this last one, and I'll dig into it, but wouldn't it also be the time constraint of it as well? If every single time we're having to wait 5 years in order for MHKs or a by-election to occur, in order for there to be some type of real shake-up in the, the House of Keys in order to take place, what would then be the point of them actually having much more dominant powers? Because what it seems to me is the fact that the Keys is growing in dominant powers, and there isn't anything really there to eject them. It's not like you're going to have the Crown there to say, oh, we're going to dissolve Parliament. It's not like the Lieutenant Governor is going to operate on that behalf. It's not like you're going to have the people to operate on it. And even when you have a special majority, what is it now, 16? Which exactly, 16 or 17, which you then have the Legislative Council, which then may disapprove of a particular set of acts. And then if that's not in there within a certain time span, you could have a rogue government for 5 years acting in and against the people, electing the chief minister, electing members of, or not even electing, but appointing members that are then ministers of government without there being any constraint to them.
Well,
yes.
One would hope that the other MHKs would in fact not pass the legislation if it was rogue.
There's no confidence in
Yes, sorry, what's the comment?
Like if we're all independent and there's no political party system, how do you then ensure that that's actually going to go across?
It's not impossible to infiltrate, and I guess pre-Trump we wouldn't believe it, but now we see just how very old constitutional models are now being pressed beyond recognition, and actually things can happen because decency, honour, those things aren't present now at the highest levels of
To move that slightly more abstract,
not just here, everywhere.
there is a sense in which you find assumptions about constitutional behaviour are being stress tested. So in Kiribati, for instance, it never occurred to somebody in any of the earlier crises to nobble the speaker, but clearly the speaker has been nobbled. And one response to concerns about the erosion of these non-legal norms and shared values, which, let's not forget, are not always good values. You know, there are class, race, gender biases built into some of these.
The rise of fascist parties, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, it's there.
But one response is to write a constitution down.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have one possibility, steady as it goes, current Chief Minister, maybe incremental change, move towards more of a Westminster model. I think that's independent until we have a growth of a party system in the Isle of Man. Mr. President, this is one of my more contentious points, I think. If you're after something authentically Manx, in the span of Manx history, going back to 1417, 1415, when the English and Scots stopped burning all of our legal records, thank you very much. If you go from then, if you go the whole span, actually having a head of government who is not responsible for Tynwald is the Manx model. So actually you could say, look, if you want to be more distinctively Manx, the Chief Minister, which is basically largely inspired by an English model, should be replaced by an elected Lieutenant Governor. Now, that might be all very well if your span is 1417 to 2019. There's hardly any of us who see that as a sensible way of looking at the world. Much more realistically, from 1900 to today, it has been a Westminster model development. It has been the reducing and the withering away of the LG, not the democratisation and the maxification of the LG. So I think that would be very, very big change. But a slightly less significant change could be to look to Kiribati and consider whether it's worth moving to a directly elected Chief Minister within the Keys. We've recently had the process for which a Chief Minister is appointed and removed change, so there is direction of travel there, it's not locked in, that's a new structure. The Kiribati system would involve the public directly expressing a democratic will for their Chief Minister, which within a population of a small state, which is between 50 and 50,000 people, you can see there's actually an argument for that. And it would be in line with the 21st century emphasis on democratic accountability. Anyone who's followed the Legislative Council debates really since about 1995, that is a consistent theme from some MHKs. The only legitimacy in the Manx system is direct democratic legitimacy. Not a universal view, but a definite theme. However, it has a number of quite serious issues, I think. One of them I've already touched upon, which is democracy is good. Do we really have the appetite to committing to 3 elections every election cycle? You elect your MHKs. They then vote on who is nominated as the Chief Minister. We then have a national election for Chief Minister. They then, if you took the pure Kiribati model, they then move out again, and out of their being constituency MHK, and you have to replace them as an MHK. The third bit of that is optional, but you would be committing to 2 elections within a month period or so every single time you had a new government in your general election. And you could argue not only about the appetite people have for elections, but the cost. Yeah, we can't run these on the same day, because that would dismantle the connection of the legislature with it.
It's very cheap in this country. Advocates who are returning officers get paid peanuts.
I was told by Alf Cannon that a second election for Chief Minister a month later would cost the Manx taxpayer around £150,000.
Now,
Worth it,
does that strike you as a lot or a little?
For the rigor of an election, it's worth it. It's how much do we care about the people we have in power. £150,000 is nothing.
And
There's quite a lot of nods.
It's a part of the problem.
Alf
Part of the
Cannon
solution.
brought a private member's bill previously in 2015 to elect a chief minister. I'm not sure what the appetite is now since I've got this paper out.
Why is Mr Thomas so against electronic voting then? Because it'd be infinitely cheaper once the system was set.
And it would be if you went, if there was secure.
It's secure, exactly. Yeah, but this is the other thing, the democracy itself, we're talking about democracy when the very word itself has now been challenged in the last 5 years. To the point where do we actually know what an election is, how it can be? It's not what it was. The word, what it meant was a process that was fair, it had some rigour, and that's gone now.
Well, it's
So
now,
nobody
well,
trusts
it's
it.
now having 51% of the vote rather than reaching a consensus.
Yeah. So
Well-
everything's up for reform, it seems like. And the Isle of Man, because it's got the world's oldest continuous parliament, it seems like it's the perfect place to try something new. As the rest of the world is floundering, and all of their attention the government's going towards solving problems, not actually creating a future longer than the next election.
The wrong way to do it would be to go, oh, Kiribati has been released since 1979, let's have Kiribati. Yeah. There would need to be a nuanced consideration of what works, what doesn't work, what would need to work in that system. And I've flagged a couple of questions I think would need to be considered very seriously. How many candidates would there be? So Kiribati has this bizarre 3 to 4 number, and that was very specific due to the Catholic Protestant dividing Isle of Man. If you had a situation where the Keys could put forward one candidate and one candidate only, I think people would be rather dissatisfied about that. You know, even if you ran the election, if you've got a ballot paper with one name on the this, you're going to think it's slightly North Korea, aren't you? Or South Korea at the very best. So you would probably want to say there had to be multiple candidates, but then how do you decide who they are?
I would probably suggest a system where if we went for that a month later election, chief minister, that MHKs, in the same way that they nominate and assent to MLC candidates, so you would need a minimum number, whether that's 4 or 6.
I think you're ignoring the changed systems and where people are now electing or working on policy as communities.
If the proof in Kiribati was the fact that the populace was stimulated by the presidential election, people, and even in England, they'll vote for the leader of the party. So it's always been about people, and leaders, and vision, not about the party. And it is about people, and they're going to vote for one person. And so giving the Isle of Man or any place an opportunity to choose who is that figurehead, I think is important because that's what people gets them off their seat.
They're not just figurehead. It's not like you're electing, say, the President of Ireland.
No, I appreciate it. Absolutely.
Tightly constrained powers. This would be the head of government.
They can come up with a vision, just like everyone else. If we're talking about multiple elections, people could vote in a figurehead that has a vision for their government, and that person can
Well,
also
hasn't that been proved now because people went for Boris, and an awful lot of people didn't vote Labour because of Corbyn. So in fact, we have kept that vision.
They like it in policies. But in the Isle of Man, with the candidates for chief minister, they've only just stood, so they've had a manifesto of their own, and they, whether their party or independent, and the month later, all the chief minister candidates within a week had a draft programme for government of their key objectives, policy objectives. So I don't see why they wouldn't do that in a public vote, as they've done previously in the...
Are those policy objectives ones that are on their manifesto or completely different ones?
Or ones negotiated
Well, you might
to
ask
attract
questions if
support.
it didn't follow what
Sorry, I was going to say, but also are we missing like the most important thing, which I think your second point is actually really accurate, is the fact that the Isle of Man is not sovereign. It's still connected to whatever legislational process with paramount powers that the United Kingdom still has over it. So it's like if you have this concept, like Kiribati has this 1979 independence away from the United Kingdom. It's then having to, as a sovereign state, develop a mechanism by which its chief executive then is able to enforce certain
I
policies.
see where you're coming from, but I don't think you have to wait for independence to improve the system.
Oh, I totally agree. Totally agree.
So,
How did they get to be a sovereign state when they've got a lower population than we had?
Get an Australian lawyer.
Yeah, I bet you it is for the way.
It would have been only
little-
52,000, 50-something thousand, 60,000
It's the location.
Yeah.
but they were 72,000. It's not that much
Yeah.
difference. It's still a small state.
Their economy was predominantly based on guano, and they ran out of guano, and the British gave what was left of their guano line to a different territory in order to smooth things over. So there was no British interest in continuing to possess Kiribati, and that's why Kiribati left the British Empire.
Simple as that, yeah.
And that's very well documented, and that's part of Wilson's general cost-benefit analysis of the empire throughout. So, how many candidates would there be? I think it needs to be one, otherwise you get some seriously strange situations. How would they be chosen? The Kiribati system, the choice is down to the legislature. Now, if you are going to go for a pure presidential system, I think your choice of chief minister needs to command some element of support in the legislature, or you're going to get deadlocks and failure to actually be able to progress. So this sort of idea that you actually have the legislature, remember, are themselves holders of democratic mandate, them involved in looking at the peers and saying, actually, you two are very sensible candidates. Oh my God, what have we got next? Yeah? It's undemocratic, but it's also an argument saying anyone who gets a certain number of signatures should be able to be nominated. But I think it's quite pragmatic. How would you square conflicts between the Chief Minister and the legislature, especially when the keys are their own democratic mandate? This has been the sticking point to major reform in the Legislative Council. Because whenever anyone has talked about a democratic mandate for the LC, the concern is how do you square that with the democratic mandate of the House of Keys? In particular, if you kept the LC the size it is, and the Keys the size it is, an elected Legislative Council member would have got more votes than each MHK, considerably more. Okay? I love the Kiribati model. I know it's a bit controversial, it's a bit nuclear, but the idea of this big red button that flushes everybody out and all the mandates are renewed, I think it's a very elegant way of dealing with this parish. Okay? And actually, an unpublished historian of Kiribati, who was got in touch with me after this work was done, he thinks that nuclear button, the big red button, is what has stopped Kiribati becoming totalitarian. Because he argues that actually, because everyone goes out, you can't get a situation where the leader of the government loses and goes, oh, right, okay, look, I'll give you a good job. You know, vote for me next time, I'll keep you in, and massages the arithmetic in the small chamber.
Is campaigning on party lines, is it?
Now there are theoretical parties, they seem to be almost meaningless. So you have had a situation where somebody has been a member of one party and has been nominated to be very beneficiary, not by their own party, but by other people's parties, and has then been elected. And you know, you think MHKs move fluidly between parties, it does nothing to the Kiribati system.
And religion as well, is that, it's a religious allegiance, you think, in that system?
No, I think that thing has materialised. The island issue is relevant because you have 33 different islands, and so you have different interests in different parts of it. But no, it's safely coherent.
What if this comes out? Sorry, this reminds me. Sorry. This idea of this, because it rather frightened me, concerned me, that this friction you say between Catholics and Protestants. What's all that about?
Missionaries, I think is the short answer.
Bear in mind, I think we're vastly overgoverned. How do our numbers of MHKs and LCs compare to Kiribati?
Now, I actually have the data on this because I did number crunching, but I don't have it in hand. We are very low in terms of the number of elected people. Out of the 22 small democracies I looked at, we were around about 15 lowest in terms of the number of elected politicians we had for our population. Jersey and Guernsey at the top.
80,000 people.
Yeah.
LCs and MHKs combined.
Yeah. Well, the NLC are democratically elected. If you look at democratically elected representatives, we have fewer per head than 14 of 22 states I looked at.
Does that also take into consideration local councils?
Just the national. If you drop me an email, I'll send you the figures you find interesting. How would a chief minister be removed? I think we've talked about that. The idea that actually the legislature was getting involved. since the paper this is based on came on a number of websites, a number of people have seen some exciting interactions between this mechanism and the recall mechanism. But I won't go there, that's for another day, I think. And if you had a single Manx politician who had a national mandate, which could be a majority of the people who voted, what would the knock-on effect be for other parts of our structure? Would there be implications for President of Tynwald, for instance? Would there be implications for the Lieutenant Governor? How do you square these different things? I think they would need to be talked about as well.
Is that what's then what's a prime question? Is the Chief Minister the right role? In the sense that, you know, we've just created this role in the past 30 years. So it's the fact that is this the right role going forward for the type of democracy that we want to see the argument have or not? Because it could in fact be the fact that we've looked at this role, it doesn't suit the purposes of any one of the particular models, and therefore a new role should be created.
If it's not optimum, yeah, if something not optimum, and there's things like everywhere else in society, innovation happens and technology, there's always this R&D mentality, except government is just so slow. When we realise something's not working, or is it optimum? If it's not optimum, how could it then be innovated?
At the risk of sounding like a white-haired law professor, the pace of change in Tynwald in the last 5 years has been absolutely fantastic. Jaw-dropping. So I'm not saying that there is not room for more change, and I've identified some quite radical possible rooms of change, but I don't think there is stasis in Tynwald at all. Whereas if you look at the debates in the 60s even, which were quite a lively constitutional period, much quieter than we've got now. You know, the change in the appointment of Chief Minister is a biggie.
Yeah.
It's 86 to 96 with Miles Walker. He's the first Chief Minister. But I agree, I think the change that we've just, the 2018 change is significant.
Yeah. And also the way in which it was done, with the House of Keys overriding the council, that was important as well.
Could we break slightly this tradition and say that the Chief Minister swears an oath to the people of the Isle of Man rather than to the Queen, who had to go in Westminster Abbey to the Four Corners and ask the people to elect her as sovereign? So we have somebody in charge of this island in these terms that swears an oath effectively to someone else, a foreign ruler.
That gets us into the independence debate, which I have contributed to before, but I think not today. But if you wanted an oath which was one more acceptable to a Republican Manx politician, the Deemster's oath I would be very fond of. So to treat people as evenly as the bones on the spine.
The Deemster actually courts, and you didn't get into judicial, but we're part of the UK because the maps that I've seen, cartographers, the organ doming on Manx television, Martin Burney and Walton, and police email sites is all .co.uk or .uk. So we see
They they must have chosen.
no, sorry to interrupt. There's 5 pieces of recent communicated with .uk email addresses. My friend's sailing map has Isle of Man UK, and organ doming has an HS/UK. So are we part of the UK as part of my question? Which stands for allegiance, because we see it. Unfortunately, this might never have been on the website. On the website, it says we are not and have never been part of the UK. We seem to be part of a corporate entity registered on Brexit. Can I ask that?
We are not part of the UK. We are a possession of the Crown. You will find some Manx constitutional lawyers take umbrage with the idea we are a possession of the UK.
Yes.
But we are a possession of the UK Crown. And the UK Crown Constitution is committed to following advice of the UK government.
Under the UK corporation registered on Brexit.
According to the sovereignty of the Parliament.
There are lots of misunderstandings about the Manx position. You'll find that all over the houses in Great Britain, the houses in Manchester.
And organs? NHS organs? We're not part of the UK.
But let me give you one way of looking at this. There are definitely some anomalies, but part of that is what works for people in the Isle of Man. So maybe there's actually the number of biomatches that would work if you had a purely Manx registry wouldn't be very productive. So
We're sovereign people.
We are a sovereign people who may want to be able to take English organs. The example I would give you is the Jurisdiction Privy Council, okay? The Jurisdiction Privy Council looks like a classic example of imperialism. The Sultan of Brunei, their final court of appeal from Brunei is the Privy Council. And the Brunei pays the Privy Council for every case the Privy Council hears. They have contracted out the specialist judicial work of their apex court. So it's not actually, it doesn't mean that Brunei is not independent. It means Brunei has chosen to contract in particular services.
It's a good point.
You're all in down. So let me just finish very quickly, but I think we've already got there. How is time? 2, okay. I was going to ask you, where next? I think we've already got to explore some of these issues, and I think we're out of time. So, thank you very much, folks.